Hello there, this is Oli from another site and welcome for errors of episode 3 of the Chernobyl series. So the episode begins with divers who for some reason have oxygen cylinders, yet the hoses from them are not connected to their masks, which pretty much eliminates the point of using them. In reality, they didn't put on any cylinders, they only had masks and rubber suits, and the maximum radiation level on their way was 10 Röntgen per hour. As I said in the last video, one of them died 19 years later and 2 others are still alive. And of course, the first thing they are given when they come back is vodka. I mean, why not at least wash them first? But this is Russia, right? No vodka, no life. Then there is the scene in hospital number 6 in Moscow where the wife of firefighter Ignatenko arrived. She is not allowed to see her husband, by the way it's reasonable since it is dangerous to be near them, and bribes the nurse. Now let me explain how it used to be there. In the USSR, in most cases it was impossible to just slip in a fiver or a tenner. You had to know certain people who would do something for you, or ask other certain people to do something for you. With doctors or nurses, you would give them some good alcohol or some nice food, for instance a bottle of cognac and a box of chocolates, and usually after they've done something for you. And it's not compulsory to give them stuff, it's only a gesture of gratitude. It would be extremely unusual to see such a scene as shown in the episode, unlike American detective movies where all you have to do to make someone talk for you is to give them a $20 bill. Ludmila indeed followed her husband to Moscow. As in the series, she lied to the nurses and didn't say that she was pregnant. She lost her baby, unfortunately. In her interview with the BBC, she said that it was painful for her to watch the series because her husband was shown screaming of pain and many other details. In reality, he was not as disfigured as shown in the series and he never expressed his suffering in any way. There is another scene where Ludmila opens the window and then lies to her husband about what she could see. That never happened. In reality, on the 1st of May, he asked her to open the window to see the fireworks. May the 1st was a public holiday in the USSR. When she did so, he stood up and gave her flowers that he had hid under his pillow. So the little story of love was turned into a story of a lie. Then comes the scene in which Legasov demands the evacuation of a much larger territory. In the series, Legasov demands an increase of the exclusion zone. He believes that 30 kilometers is not enough, but in fact he didn't make such requirements. Well, at least according to his audio records. Then we see a scene where Sherbina asks for all of the liquid nitrogen of the USSR. I don't think that was the case. I couldn't get the exact figures for the production of liquid nitrogen, but Legasov himself says in the audio recordings that all the materials were supplied to them in the right quantities at once. In particular, about nitrogen, he says that a whole train of nitrogen was brought at first enquiry. In addition, Legasov didn't believe that the possibility of fuel discharge into groundwater was 50%, as he states in the episode. On the contrary, from the very beginning he considered the work of the miners to be useless. And in fact it was, as this scenario never happened. Then they talk on the street as the evil KGB is watching everyone. Actually, this is partially true. Gorbachev said in an interview that he ordered the KGB to transmit to him all the information from the place, including the conversations of the scientists in 1986. But being so obvious is kind of strange and counterproductive if you ask me. Legasov goes to the hotel where he meets Hamyuk and immediately begins to drink the non-existent vodka. To those of you who don't know, all beverages stronger than 8% of alcohol were banned due to the prohibition. Legasov says that an investigation must be carried out. Let me clarify a couple of points. When such accidents occur, the investigation begins immediately because this could be an accident or it could be a sabotage. In any case, the investigation begins straight away. People get questioned and authorities usually find every detail, including who pressed which button and when, what orders were given and to whom, and so on. So Hamyuk's private investigation wouldn't have been useful here. Then comes the scene with the Tula miners, who of course drink vodka. They are visited by the Minister of Coal Industry with 2 soldiers. Let me get it straight with ubiquitous soldiers. The highest officials of the country had to have bodyguards with them. They were all KGB officers from the 9th Department. Today it is a separate service called FSO, Federal Security Service. But they only worked with the highest officials, so neither Sherbina nor Shadov had it. Even if they had had the bodyguards with them, they would have been dressed as civilians and wouldn't have had rifles on them. Now, I have to say a couple of words about how the miners were asked to go and work in Chernobyl. In Soviet Union, you never had to threaten anyone to do something like that. At any factory, mine or any enterprise, there were members of the Communist Party. To become a member, you had to be an excellent worker and you had to have solid reputation among other workers so that others looked up at you. In such event, some officials would come and say something like, "Comrades, do we have communists here? Because motherland needs help." No communists would reject, as they were considered to be the best in every way, and others would go and help them voluntarily. As the Tula miners themselves later said in many interviews, the authorities only called for volunteers and didn't pull anyone by force. By the way, there were Tula miners in Chernobyl, but the first detachment was from the Donbass, which is logical because it is closer to Chernobyl. But in Donbass, they worked with hard soils. Therefore, the authorities called the next nearest miners from Tula. In Tula, the soil is soft, just like in Chernobyl, so their techniques and knowledge was much more useful there. Coming back to the episode, the miners proceed to wipe their hands on him. Here I have to talk about Shadov. Shadov had a great career, but he started from the very bottom. He started working as a miner at the age of 15 and worked all the way to the top. He had great reputation among the miners since he himself began as a miner, so they considered him to be one of them. And he was not a hipster, he was quite a tough man. It would take a madman to try to wipe his hand on Shadov's suit. The whole scene looks like a stupid slapstick comedy to me. Then comes the scene with the obnoxious miner who discusses how they will dig a tunnel, taking Legasov's cigarettes as if he was some kind of a thug. In the end, when he leaves, Legasov asks, "Are they all like that?" And Sherbina replies that indeed they are all like that. The truth is that the miners had the highest salaries in the country and they could afford pretty much anything without taking anyone's stuff. Then they dig a tunnel without any machines whatsoever, but with square shovels, not even with spade shovels. I mean, the work was hard, but it wasn't as ridiculous as shown in the series. The leader of the miners again calls General Pikalov like a dog and requires ventilation. The general then replies with the most idiotic question: "What for?" In fact, they worked with ventilation, but could not run a normal, wide pipe, so the air was supplied through fire hoses. According to the miners, the temperature was really high, up to 40 degrees Celsius, but at the same time they worked for 3 hours per shift. Every 2 days their blood was checked, and if there were any deviations from the norm, then they were not allowed to work. The work was completed in a month, although initially they were given 3 months. And of course, they didn't work naked. This is fiction. Sometimes they would wear only their pants and boots. In general, the weather in that region was hot because chemical forces dispersed clouds to prevent rain. By the way, they did the same during the Olympic Games in Moscow in 1980. There were no rains for the whole period of the event. In Chernobyl, they prevented rains to carry out work on the river and to prevent the contaminated water from getting into the ground. The scale of the work was titanic, and the series doesn't show a half of what was going on there. Legasov in his audio record says that the mining work was done in vain since the fuel did not reach the pan and it didn't have to be cooled. Then a meeting in Moscow with Legasov and Sherbina. There's a big painting on the wall, some of you must be familiar with it, It is called Ivan the Terrible is killing his son. The picture gives us a chance to understand Russia a bit more, and here's why. We do not know for sure how Ivan, the son of Ivan the Terrible, died. The rumors about him being killed by his father are only rumors, and even if he was killed, that must have probably happened by poisoning, as his bones are full of lead and mercury, at least according to a research carried out in 1963. See, Ivan the Terrible belongs to a dynasty called Rurikovich that ruled Russia for 7.5 centuries. In the 17th century, a new dynasty comes, the Romanovs, and there is a tradition in Russia that every new regime throws dirt onto previous one. Like modern Russian leaders blame Soviets for everything, and the communists used to do the same by saying that Tsarist Russia was a prison for nations. And the Romanovs are not an exception. In order to legitimize their reign, they spread black propaganda about the Rurikoviches. The myth that Ivan IV killed his son became a commonplace when it was included into a book called History of the Russian State by Nikolai Karamzin in 1818. So the picture today is exposed in Tretiakov Gallery and shouldn't have been in Kremlin. So why did the creators of the series put it there? To show the symbol of madness of all Russian leaders. I have got to say that Ivan the Terrible, despite his nickname, wasn't that terrible. During his reign, 4,000 people were killed as a result of his orders. Compare it with Henry VIII Tudor, who ruled England at about the same time, and during whose reign around 70,000 people were executed. Although the numbers seem to be too high, but even if we halve it, it is still 9 times bigger than the Ivan's kill count. At the end of the episode, they showed the funeral of the firefighters. They were buried in a mass grave, and then a concrete mixer truck arrives and somehow is able to pour in at least 30 cubic meters of concrete, despite the fact that this type of truck could only carry 7 cubic meters. The whole place is located in the middle of nowhere, which gives us an impression that the heroes are forgotten straight away. In fact, the firefighters are buried in a cemetery in Mytino, Moscow, where there is an alley with a monument in their honor. Although, of course, no memorial is worth a human life. Well, this is it for episode 3, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please write them down in the comments section. I will answer them either in a special video or in comments section as well. Well, this is it. See you next time. Bye.